China's new 5 and 5-year plan. They are focused on frontier technologies. So when we talk about farming and producing, they're looking at biomanufacturing, where one day they may not need a farm. We've done a really great job at actually winning those in premium markets around the world. But my question is, does it protect our margin? The whole food and grocery manufacturing sector turns over $173 billion. Last count was 300,000 people, so that's sizable.
Welcome to Manufacturing Tech Australia with Shane Williams and Paul Mason, where they share the latest manufacturing and tech news and explore innovative solutions to help you improve your business.
But before we kick off the show, a big thanks to our season sponsors, Acacia Consulting Services, supporting manufacturers with modern ERP solutions that connect the shop floor, supply chain and business systems. If you want to reach out to Acacia, you can phone them on 03 8560 5220 to book your complimentary business improvement session. And now, on with the show. Angeline, welcome to Manufacturing Tech Australia and thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning, Paul. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to unpack what today will be.
Yeah, I am too. Angeline Achariya from Innovation Gamechangers. For those that don't know Angeline, she has spent over 2 decades in food innovation and food manufacturing. And you've worked in so many different leadership roles in Simplot, Yum Brands, Mondelez, Fonterra, Mars. You co-founded the Food Innovation Centre, which transitioned to the Monash Food Innovation Centre. And now you're basically working on a bunch of boards, advising people around innovation in the food sector and also other areas of innovation. So I'm really excited to have you on the show here. That's a really impressive CV.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I always do say, Paul, that you probably have had a product that I've had a hand in your freezer, in your fridge, or in your pantry, or on your plate in a restaurant. So that's a nice way to feel the role of feeding the world, I say.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I like that. I want to get you on the show today because CMAT's coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And I know we've known each other for a while, but we actually ended up on the same panel at Industrial Transformation, the co-located event next to CMAT.
We are.
Yeah. So it's 11:30 on the 23rd of June. We're going to be talking all about smart factory ecosystems. So that sounds like it should be fun.
I think so. We'll probably give our listeners a little tease today and hopefully they'll turn up for more.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because Shane and I, we don't often talk too much about food manufacturing, but it's easily the biggest sector by a mile in terms of manufacturing here in this country. And when people think smart factories, they often think about electronics and lights out and all these fancy robots and stuff. But they don't necessarily think about food manufacturing. So I guess maybe to kick off things, what are the things that you can talk about in food manufacturing that first comes to mind when you say innovation and smart factories in food manufacturing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's one of those, whenever we look at manufacturing, I think it's 2 parts. One, lots of stainless steel, lots of technology and everything else. And then when it comes to food, we assume our food just goes from land or from a fishing vessel or somewhere and it just ends up on your plate or through the supermarket, right? So it's a little bit of, we focus so much on the farmer and the producer, which we absolutely need to. And then somehow this big thing in the middle, which is that food manufacturing, right? Because it's where we're transforming, we're process, formulation, design, packaging, food safety, because you can't kill anyone with your food, the cold chain that you go through, all the labeling and the regulatory requirements. And then if you're exporting, all the logistics, getting it to retail in a supermarket, right? And so all of those things is where value is created along the chain. So I think it's really important for anyone out there who's kind of thinking manufacturing, the role of manufacturing in food, because that's really where the value is created, I say, between the farm and the retailer end, and therefore to your plate as well. Your question around sort of technology, I think from a side in food, we have used technology. I remember back in my Mars days, which was early 2000s, we had robotics in the factory, really optimizing the way that we were packing, picking, and things like that. So food manufacturing, because we are so lean and very skinny margins, we operate from a place of what I call strength, and sometimes it doesn't feel that way, right? But that strength means that we become very creative, very innovative in everything from the ingredient and the formulation, the process, the pick and place, and then getting things out to our customers on the other end. And all of that is really through technology, because we've had to lean in to protect those very tiny margins that we have along the food value chain as well.
Yeah, and there seems to be such a wide variety of manufacturers. I was just talking to my wife this morning about, we're going to be talking about food manufacturing today. And she's like, we have such a diverse culture here in Australia, and we have so many amazing different foods. That's the reason why we've got so many of these great food manufacturing here, because there's so many different things they've got to produce, but they're all shapes and sizes, right? They can be someone's backyard garage producing small things, and right up to fully automated things like you mentioned with Mars. But even lots of factories I've been through that are $50 to $100 million setups, still very limited amount of automation and technology in there.
Yeah, and this is the thing. So you have on one end the really big food players, and there's a handful of those, and I've worked in a lot of them over my career. And then on the other hand, you have really the small and mediums, and probably a lot more in the S part of that SME than the medium part. I think the last stat that I saw was about 98% of food and beverage in Australia is SME. That's a lot,
Wow.
right? That's a lot of companies that are small companies, obviously very entrepreneurial. But guess what? The whole food and grocery manufacturing sector turns over $173 billion. Just under, I think last count was 300,000 people. So that's sizable. And it's 36% of jobs in regional communities. A lot of those companies I worked in, we had factories in region. So we're always out there. So it's not a niche sector.
Yeah.
And I really think it's the backbone of regional Australia. When you think about and you put a map out and you locate, you'll see food manufacturers and the impact that they have. And then and that's only manufacturing, right? But then if you expand that and you look at your total food value system and food chain, you look at agriculture and what that does. And so you add the agriculture piece and you've got a sizable supply chain here that feeds all of us at the end of the day, plus more.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? I actually did a keynote yesterday on the future of manufacturing out here in Southeast Melbourne. And looking at the statistics, I think people in the audience were genuinely surprised that food is our biggest manufacturing sector.
I'm so glad you're spreading the word.
I had to put it up there because we're talking about GDP in manufacturing and all this kind of stuff. And I think people were surprised because, yeah, like I said, it's nearly 300,000 jobs. But what's interesting is the next sector, like machinery and equipment, it's a bit under 150. So food and bev is actually twice as large as the next biggest sector. And bakery alone, 63,000 jobs. So that is a lot of things going on in making food.
Yeah, which is an exciting, and like you say, not everybody appreciates it. Firstly, understands it. So I think we have a job to communicate and broadcast that. Ultimately, as living in a country like Australia, and look, I've worked internationally and lived in countries, and home has always been back here. But I think one of the things that we probably don't appreciate, because we have an abundance of, is food. It's taken for granted that we will have it, we'll have it on the plate, we'll open the fridge and it's there. And until you have things like we had the pandemic happen and we had the supply chain woes, we're still in the geopolitical cycle. That's only going to get probably, more interesting, let's say, over the coming years. But it does mean that it's a sector that bears a lot of brunt. And again, back down to those margins. And I think it's worth kind of just contextualizing perhaps for your audience. So when you think about it, I mentioned before, you've got the farmers on one end, you've got the retailer concentration on the other end. And the middle, sometimes the sector gets squeezed by both, right? We can sit here and kind of go, okay, how do we actually get that? It's not the luxury of margin, but how do we actually get that compressed margin pointing towards the capital expenditure that we need, which is technology, it's robotics, it's automation, and it's innovation at the end of the day. And I was reading the Australian Food and Grocery Council's latest report, which was, I think it's towards 2030 it's called, and the numbers are there, right? It showed that the sector actually grew in CAGR about 6.3% since 2020. That's a pretty good growth when you think about it. Then when you adjust it for this inflation piece that we're all feeling, it falls down to 3.9%, right? So what that means is the profit to turnover has declined, and therefore it means that the sector is therefore generating less profit for every dollar of revenue that it generates. And that revenue growth then starts to mask the margin problem, right? Which is when I talked about those skinny margins. And then, of course, our R&D, which is a space you and I also intersect in, has not really grown, and capital investment has fallen down, I think, circa 11% in the last sort of 23, 24 year. So I kind of describe this kind of piece as a bit of a short-term memory, and every cycle of pressure that we get across the sector and industry, we tend to come back with the same response, which is cut costs, protect the margin, defer the investment that you were looking to make because you just haven't got enough cash in the kitty. And then when the next cycle arrives, you're starting off of a worse position and you go through that cycle again. So in my experience, when I've worked in manufacturing all that time, it's actually the manufacturers who start to ask the question, what would it take to make that investment and that technology and a partnership as a structural decision rather than a discretionary one? Because you always say, in the good times, then we will invest. It's not. It's actually probably in those times when it's not so good, that's when you need to invest to ride the next thing that will come through as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think actually I ran a bit of a survey yesterday at this keynote trying to understand what are the barriers to technology adoption, and still capital is the highest ranked issue. That's the roadblock. Access to capital, but I actually don't think it's so much capital. I think it's not a good enough understanding of return on investment, understanding how long payback periods and being able to calculate that out, work it out. They don't understand that they can operationalize the expenditure instead of capitalizing. They can lease, there's payment plans, there's all sorts of things that there's sort of tips and tricks and ways around it. Yeah, and I totally agree with that cycle. Like if you've got the capacity to invest, and that's when you see the winners come through and the stronger companies, right? It's like riding the stock market. You're not buying at the top of the peak. You're buying when everyone else is selling. So
Absolutely. I have to concur. I do not believe capital is the constraint or the problem. I think there's capital around. You can, of course, you have to look and find it as long as you have a viable and a feasible business case that actually gets you the return that you're looking for, and asking those right questions, as you pointed out there.
yeah, and we spoke offline. You were talking about underinvestment in terms of all the sort of supporting infrastructure and stainless steel production and automation technology and the software behind it and all that kind of thing. Do you think that's the reason why there's all this underinvestment in the food sector? Is it this misunderstanding of what that return is and what it looks like and when to invest and how to invest?
I think so, and I think it goes back to that cyclic thing of, okay, as we go into much more of this uncertainty, how are businesses, and I think this really does come down to, at the board level of an organization, how are you preparing through scenario analysis and planning so that your organization doesn't react, right? And you can actually go to a response type mechanism, which means that you have thought through the best, the middle, the worst case scenario, and hope to God you never have to use one of those. But when you do, then that's the way to do it, rather than otherwise the first approach is always going to be let's cut cost, right? And always then goes to cost in terms of overheads, it's investment, it's discretionary R&D and innovation, because you're just trying to keep and survive. And you hear that all the time from O to say, and then they kind of go, hang on, but we're not growing. You're not growing because you haven't invested either. So at some point, it's this duality of there's your core, and the core needs to be absolutely effective and efficient to run, but it also needs to be your investment case into how you look at growth as well. And I don't think you can do one without the other. And we saw that actually classic. I was Simplot in that time after COVID, and then we had all the supply chain. And because a lot of companies in food could not supply their retail customers, so you had empty shelves, which is the worst thing you can ever do in the food space, because your customers absolutely tell you, and then your consumers also tell you that. And we found that a lot of companies just went to, hang on, I've just got to go back to my core, my basics, and do that. And so they rode that wave for a year and a half, and then come the cycle, all of a sudden your customers, like the retailers, are going, where's the innovation guys? When are you coming to give me new news? Because that's the way that they're differentiating themselves,
Yeah.
right? It's not the same product in every retail. It's new news, which then brings more foot traffic in, and you go from there. So I think it's a balance of the duality of how do you have both, and it's going to become more imperative now in an uncertain geopolitical climate that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. You need to innovate on that, on the product side, but also on the manufacturing side at the same time, invest in both.
Yeah, across the whole value chain, right? So
Yeah.
it's just not always new products out. It's your process, its efficiency, its effectiveness that you need to look at, your operation excellence.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also a bit of a mindset thing from management and the people in the companies as well, because they need to understand that it's not so much a cost in some of these cases, it's more of an investment. If it's an investment in technology, for example, that's solving problems like automating your asset reporting and those kind of things that can really make a big difference. I've seen in some businesses that were reluctant to put in even something as simple as a palletizer. They had massive problems with casual staff. They had to, like, every day they were struggling to get through an agency to try and get casual staff to come in and move boxes. And the problems that this palletizer solved was not just a financial one, an improvement on that line, but it was also the people management as well from the casuals. And then they could redeploy their existing people to other areas to add more value there. So there's a million different factors at play, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big learnings I've had through my experience is I talked about us in Australia, we have grown up on the volume game, right? It is about volume. So the more you produce, the more markets you can, and that's how we've achieved scale over decades, for instance. But the danger in the volume cycle is that, yes, you make yourself as efficient on volume. So many times in all of those organizations that I've worked in, the one question that you ask is, what is your profitability and your margin looking like? All the way back down to your product SKU level, your whole process, and how do you connect it through the chain? So whatever is coming, if you're sourcing from a farm, you're converting in your factory, that goes to the shelf in a retailer, for instance, do we understand that whole value map and where the margin is going? And I tend to find it's a little bit when started, right? It's all top line revenue, but the first question around profitability, and everyone goes, huh? What is that? And why do I need to care about that from day dot? Well, you do, because that means ultimately at the end of the day, whether you'll be a business that continues and sustains its business model or you don't survive. And I think that's a huge difference in it, even back to that mindset. So how do we get actually people thinking that? And it's not business owners never thought of that. They have, absolutely, because they've started a business. They've had all of that entrepreneurial learning and thinking, right? But it's I think if it's mindset or back to the capital question on money, I think it's really both, and happy to unpack that in terms of what that could look like and what I've seen over the years as well.
Yeah, while we're on that, we were talking about quality and volume earlier, and you were talking to me before we even jumped on this call about how even something that we're awesome at, like the beef industry here, you said we're now starting to be challenged by countries like Paraguay, Brazil, Canada, other countries that are emerging their technology and their capabilities in this space of producing really high quality stuff. Now, how is that going to impact us? We're good at things like growing berries down in Tassie in the beautiful clean air and fresh water, but all those are strategic advantages that we have. Are these at risk?
Oh, look, I think there's risk and reward in that. And it's interesting. I was speaking 2 weeks ago in New Zealand. I had 3 speaking gigs, and one of them was at Eat Tipu, which is their big food and fiber event that they run. And it has actually everyone from farmer all the way to the chair of a board. So quite a broad audience coming in. And I know one of the things I think that we as Australia and New Zealand share is we have grown on the back of commodity, and we're great at producing. I think the Kiwis have been a little bit maybe cleverer at how they've managed their brand, for instance, right? So one of the things I always hear about in Australia is, and I know we have the clean, green reputation that our food is built on. It's been over the decades. We've done a really great job at actually winning those in premium markets around the world, right? So our reputation is there. But my question is, does it protect our margin? Back again to that margin questions. And coming from the consumer goods world, that's the perspective I bring. And then when you try and connect that to the commodity world, or where we produce more beef, more wheat, more whatever, right? But what we're doing is we're actually then giving that away to somebody else to convert in another market somewhere. And then in some cases, we actually buy it back, right? So we're giving away margin at every step of that equation. And the question now becomes is, what can we actually own? And in this phase of uncertainty where you're looking at questions like sovereignty, every nation around the world is, as well as food security. I think for the first time, those words have come together in such a national way, which I think is the best thing ever. But the question for me is, we have to start to shift that game of not just produce more volume. We have to start to speak to those buyers that are sitting in a Tokyo or a Singapore or a Middle East who are willing to pay more, but they want more than clean, green reputation and all of that, right? They want sophistication, not just from our farms, but they want to know this is something that is ready for a consumer market in the way that they're asking for their product on their plate, or the way that they experience it. So, and that means, Paul, we've got to not just kind of go, okay, make and ship it off. We've got to then go, we grow this, or we can harvest this. How do we now convert this to what that market and that consumer wants, and start to do that, whether we manufacture all of it here and distribute, or we partner in region as well, because at the end of the day, we have enough in abundance, and we always will, that we have to think region as well, rather than just sitting here in Australia, because it comes back to that whole question on, will we have enough to then reinvest, right? Because the capital, therefore, has to be attracted on the bigger markets as opposed to just the market that we are here as well.
So more listening to voice of the customer, localized regional solutions that sort of meet their needs more so than pushing our stuff on them, what we think they need or want.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to only in the region. China is one of our biggest trade partners. They were the biggest when we had the pandemic, and then they seem to be running. If you look at some of the things that they're doing, and I think I quickly had a brief thing with you on this, right? You look at the way that they're setting up, and this is me reading from some of the recent reports that have come through, where China is basically applying that same playbook that they took to manufacturing solar panels and EVs to food now. And that's because food sovereignty and food security are one of the biggest issues. What I read in this report that was through AgriPulse, saying that Beijing is now building production hubs, and they're picking national champions, right? And that's the way that they kind of govern and run their country, that they can do that. But they're picking the winners in a sense and really backing it. And food is becoming huge. And even just on export alone, China's export grew about 78 billion in 2021, right? And it's going to grow even more. I think it was 108 billion in 2024. And at the end of, sort of 2025, with China's new 5-year plan that they've put out, they are focused on frontier technologies. So when we talk about farming and producing, they're looking at biomanufacturing, where one day they may not need a farm to make your food. And that is not even a future piece, Paul. It's actually here. We're seeing that technology now scale in terms of bio innovation coming through, right? So I think this whole piece that we talk about, and that's become like a new sexy word out there. And resilience is not just about kind of going, actually, how do I respond and make sure that I continue to be? Resilience is about that long game and knowing that manufacturing, which has just been just in time, is actually shifting. The whole chain is being reimagined. So how do we start to step in to this space? And even a simple exercise, if you're a manufacturer listening to this, just step back, and I've done this in organizations that I've been in, is map your whole food supply chains and identify where you might have the vulnerabilities. For instance, I've been in organizations where my goodness, 60% of our product portfolio was coming from international because it was a faster way, back to your point of
Yeah.
not investing. So actually, we'll have the great ideas and we'll go and find a manufacturing asset and make it and then import it back in. Will be a quicker to market, which is the game that FMCG has to play in, right? So I think if manufacturers just sit back and actually map that out and know where the vulnerabilities are. So the first thing is awareness. The second thing is then you start to go, okay, is that now conducive in the current environment that we are in or the environment that we're going in? And what is therefore my next plan to be able to de-risk myself along that supply chain so I have one continuation of business, but I also can grow in the future as well.
Angeline, I love that you mentioned China there because I don't think any manufacturers in this country in the food space have probably thought about this yet. Because if you have a look at that Made in China plan 2025, it is so impressive. The 10 pillars they're focusing on, and actually not only the food sector, but they're also they've specified in their agricultural technology as well. And that's one of the things we're super good at in this country. But yeah, it's so impressive. Their planning, their long term vision. I was actually talking about an example yesterday of BYD and why they're from nothing to second largest seller of cars here in just 5 years. They're right behind Toyota. It's mad. And it's all from their vertical integration, how quickly they can move because they are vertically integrated, the way that their development cycles are 18 months, not 3 to 5 years like traditional car companies. So if China's coming for the food sector like they're coming for the others, I think we've all got lessons to learn from them.
Oh, I agree, but I think also at the same time we all sit in the same region as well, right? And one of the things, I chair for the Australia China Business Council, the Agribusiness and Food Forum, and one of the conversations we're having is it's not from a bilateral trade perspective. It's not just trade transaction. We've got to move ourselves to more of this bilateral partnership mindset where we're collaborating and maybe we're coming together and sharing intellectual property. We're creating new IP together and we're actually becoming a little bit more stickier in our partnership, right? Because it will be in these kind of times of uncertainty where those relationships will absolutely come in handy. And I think we're seeing that, right? Our ability to perhaps, with the government currently being able to get some of the fuel and the fertilizer into the country has not been from the traditional supply chains that has come through. It's been probably a lot because of some of the relationships. So how do we get more of that and not use the old playbook of just produce more and sell? And that's the game we play. The game actually has changed, and the players around the field and in the field are changing very fast as well.
Yeah, the global trade, that all fell apart during COVID, but I totally agree. We need to bring some of that back. The collaboration between different countries, like work closer together. What are we good at? What are you good at? It makes so much sense. And I was going to ask you the next question about what does good look like? And is that exactly what we're talking about here? It's working together on what are you good at? What am I good at? How are we going to work together? What is that the definition of moving forward?
I think so. I think we've got to think the long game and then work back from there. And what is the place we want to be? And you kind of mentioned I do sit across a number of other sectors and industries through some of my board roles as well. And it's the same question, are we going to own this whole space? We've invested quite a lot in quantum, for instance, right? Or now data centers as we're seeing. So I know everyone always says don't hedge your bets, but I'm a believer on the other side because I come from that innovation space and that growth, right, where you do need to hedge your bet. So I think, yes, to your point on what does good look like, I know even though we're far from everywhere else, we're not an isolated little island down here. We come from a place of strength, and I think we have to take that strength and go, what is our place and our role in the region, and what is our place and our role in the globe, and what are those areas that we are absolutely good at. And my goodness, we are bloody good in agriculture and food, and we should absolutely own that. And I know all the other sectors will say the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But then carve that out. We're great at producing, but we're not great at converting in the food manufacturing side. Great to do that in our country. We just haven't that to do that for the rest of the world. And I think that is the opportunity for us if I come purely from the lens of the space I live in.
Yeah, okay. No, it makes a lot of sense. I guess then if that's what good looks like and where the opportunities lie, what are some practical takeaways that we can give the listeners, whether that's from a food lens in manufacturing or outside of that in other sectors? What do you think is the next gameplay?
Absolutely. I love practical takeaways. We must always have practical takeaways because otherwise we can just have a little chat, Paul. So for me, I think it goes back to that earlier point I made about audit. One of the big things I think that good piece is also, I think we touched on together, is around partnerships, right? You don't have to be great at everything, but figure out where your strength is and how do you partner for complementary and mutuality. So for me, one of the things, hopefully after everyone has mapped their supply chain to look at their vulnerabilities, I would do the same audit to go, actually, who are your partners? So it's your partners across your technologies. And look, you're never going to be the best at a robotics or an AI or whatever it might be, right? So you need some partners to come in.
Yeah.
So who are your partners in that technology piece? I think most manufacturers will say, yeah, I know all my equipment suppliers, and they'll go, here's my list. And I'll go, yeah, excellent. That's great to see you've got a list of technology partners or people that you go, but who are your research partnerships, for instance? And I'm not just meaning technical research, all forms of research, right? Who's your market access partners, right? And if you can't draw that map, I think there's a real danger in there. And how do you create that value that we talked about? So it is as much about having, I think, in the times of current and the future, of having a partnership strategy. Otherwise, you end up in a series of transactions only. And partnership for me is always a little bit like a bit more than a collaboration. It's that 1+1=3. It's where you're really getting to do something that each individually you won't be able to do. So map out your supply chain, where your vulnerabilities are first, map out what your partnerships currently look like or what you're missing and how do you step into that. Then I think the third piece for me is to go and hunt for that market. So whether you're exporting already or you're not, hunt for the market where Australian provenance and manufacturing sophistication together. So not just produce and get someone else to convert it, but bring that together, and you're going to go, okay, we can now command a premium for this with that customer, with that consumer base, and then build and serve it at scale. I think that is something that if every one of our manufacturers, and I really do believe, Paul, that thing that I said about we've got the farmers on one end, the retailers on the other end, and this big gap that manufacturers fill.
Yeah.
I think manufacturers have to stop seeing themselves as the process link. They can be absolutely the architects of the redesign of how food could be. And I think that's where you will get margin. You'll get hopefully new markets that we can command and absolutely delight with the products that we have. But we can then bring in investment, which then creates opportunities and jobs for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So innovation in that sort of manufacturing bit in the middle to really drive market growth, different sectors, different regions, export markets. Yeah, I think you can apply that pretty much to any industry, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's I think we've talked a lot about food today, and even if you're sitting there and you're not a food manufacturer, I think it's still relevant, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm sure the question everyone's asking is, how am I building resilience in my supply chain? So whether you're in aircraft or any other kind of manufacturing, that is the question to ask, is about building resilience. And then how do you do that? Through partnerships, through what you can do, obviously having the smart factory ecosystem that comes together, because it'll be very, very difficult, I think, just to do that all on your own and get the kind of growth that we probably need for the next few decades.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I haven't seen many businesses have an actual partnership strategy. I think that's a really good tip there. Yeah.
Well, that's a little teaser because that's my keynote at CMAT ITA is exactly that. So
Excellent. Yeah, actually, yeah, you've got a keynote just before we have the panel session, right?
I do, yes. I won't be talking anything technology, so listen to all the other speakers on tech.
Yeah.
But certainly I'll be talking about how do you take that and increase your resilience, if you will,
Yeah,
and
excellent.
become more resilient.
Love it. And yeah, like you're saying, across when you're implementing technology, and you simply can't be across all this stuff, whether that's the innovation on the product side or the innovation on the manufacturing side. Yeah, everything's moving so quickly. You need those
Yeah,
partners.
absolutely.
Angeline, I will be seeing you at CMAT in 2 weeks' time. Looking forward to that, and the industrial transformation co-located next door.
Absolutely. It should be a good conversation. I'm looking forward to walking the floor and seeing, obviously, because I also get very attracted to shiny technology and what I can do. I'm a geek at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm more interested in is having those conversations and with companies who are there to go, okay, how are you thinking about this? And as much as if you're going to have your strategy and your technology roadmap and what you're doing, but what is your partnership strategy, Paul? That is, I think, one of the questions we should field.
Yeah, I love it. That's excellent. So if you're out there listening, it's 11:30 a.m. on the 23rd at the Industrial Transformation at Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre for our panel. And just before that, is it about 10:30 or so, Angeline? You'll be on for your keynote?
Yeah, 30 minutes before the panel, so I'll be probably, 11, I think.
All right, 11 at the Industrial Transformation stage. So there's two stages. There's that one and the CMAT one. Come to the Industrial Transformation one. I think it's on the left-hand side as you walk in. Shane and I will be running around doing interviews for a bit of the time. We've also got a booth there as part of Robotics Australia Group that will be right next door to Swinburne. So we'll have plenty of robots in our booth and at Swinburne, and Association of Manufacturing Excellence right next door to us. If you walk in the door up to the top left-hand corner of the Industrial Transformation area, we'll all be there with all the cool robots and things to show off. So get along and catch up with Angeline and I on stage there on day one, and hope to see you all there. But thanks so much. Now that promo's out of the way, Angeline.
I didn't want to interrupt. You did such a brilliant job.
Thanks so much for coming on the show and chatting to us about food manufacturing and innovation.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I really enjoyed that. And I'll use the pun, plenty of food for thought.
Absolutely. I like it.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
A big thanks to our seasoned sponsors, Acacia Consulting Services, supporting manufacturers with modern ERP solutions that connect the shop floor, supply chain and business systems. If you want to reach out to Acacia, you can phone them on 03 8560 5220 to book your complimentary business improvement session.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Tech Australia with Shane and Paul, recorded on the traditional lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people. For more information, jump on the manufacturingtech.au website. Remember to hit the follow button to join us again next time as we continue to explore the intersection of manufacturing and technology.